Sagittarius. The 6 dangerous people you must avoid. Not every smile that greets you is born from love. Not every embrace was meant to hold you with care. Some people cross your path not to uplift your spirit, but to quietly confuse your sense of self. This message is not here to make you doubt everyone. It's here to awaken the knowing within you, the part of your soul that already senses what your heart has been too kind to name. You've always been guided by truth, but sometimes, even the most radiant light forgets to question the shadows that gather near. In today's message, we begin to reveal something sacred. The 6 most dangerous souls your spirit must recognize and release. Not out of fear, but out of love for yourself, your peace, your divine journey. These are not enemies in the traditional sense. They are mirrors, teachers, and sometimes distractions sent to delay your path to alignment. Together, we will name them, see them clearly, and let go of the idea that kindness means letting everyone in. If this message resonates, if you've ever felt drained after being around certain people, or doubted yourself simply because someone else questioned your joy, you are in the right place. Like this video, share it with a fellow seeker, and subscribe to Zodiac Wisdom. You deserve a circle that sees you fully, protects your fire, and never asks you to dim your light. Gate 1. The pretender, the one who claps when you fall. Sagittarius, your light has always unsettled those who live in self-doubt. And sometimes the most dangerous people in your life are not the loudest critics, but the quiet pretenders, the ones who smile at your victories while secretly hoping you'll stumble. They do not throw stones. They throw silence, subtle words, and applause that never quite reaches their eyes. And you, with your open-hearted nature, your boundless faith in human goodness, often welcome them into your inner world without hesitation. But not every hand that reaches toward you is meant to hold you with care. Some are meant to distract you from your path of truth. As a Sagittarius, you're not easily controlled. You are fire, expansive, brave, curious. You move freely, you speak honestly, and you live boldly. That alone can be enough to make certain people uncomfortable, especially those who have long buried their own light. And so they pretend to support you. They wear the mask of the well-wisher. They echo your laughter and mimic your language of freedom. But when you begin to rise, truly rise, when your eyes glow with purpose and your dreams begin to take flight, they vanish, or worse, they stay close enough to study your steps, only to twist your story in rooms you are not invited into. The pretender is not always easy to identify because they do not oppose you directly. They position themselves as your confidant, your go-to in moments of vulnerability. They are often the ones who stood beside you during your struggles. They lent an ear when you cried. They told you they believed in you. And in some ways they did, but only as long as you stayed small enough to not trigger their shadows. The moment your voice grew stronger, the moment your soul began to stretch toward a life of deeper alignment, they no longer knew how to celebrate you. And instead of cheering, they grew distant, cold, or worse, passive-aggressively supportive with comments that made you question your joy. There's a kind of betrayal that leaves no scars on the skin but bruises the soul in quiet places. You might have felt it in the awkward pauses when you shared good news, in the way they changed the subject when you finally found the courage to chase something bold, in the way they congratulated you with a smile that didn't touch their heart. And yet, Sagittarius, you forgave. You stayed. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You believed that maybe they were just going through something. You told yourself not to overreact, because your nature is generous. You assume the best until the truth becomes undeniable. But what happens when that truth keeps whispering to you through exhaustion, through hesitation, through the sense that your energy dims every time you're near them? That's not paranoia. That's your intuition. The pretender may not say it aloud, but their energy speaks volumes. They fear your growth because it reflects back to them everything they've denied in themselves. They don't hate you. They envy the freedom you embody, the way you refuse to be tamed, the way you chase what sets your soul on fire, even if it means walking alone. And still, you've loved them, because your memory holds the versions of them that felt real. You remember the inside jokes, the late-night talks, the moments of connection that felt too sacred to doubt. But memory is not permission to sacrifice your spirit. And love is not an excuse to allow someone to remain in your space if their energy diminishes your truth. You were not born to babysit the insecurities of others. You were born to rise, to explore, to lead. And anyone who can't celebrate that, even silently, is not your tribe. There was once a Sagittarius woman who dreamed of starting her own business. For years she hesitated, doubting whether it was the right time. One day she confided in her best friend, the one who had been with her through heartbreaks and reinventions. The friend smiled and said, "I'm happy for you," but followed with, "Are you sure you're not dreaming too big? You've always been impulsive." The Sag woman paused. She didn't want to believe it. But over time, every conversation that followed was laced with doubt disguised as advice. "I'm just looking out for you," her friend would say. But the fire in her heart began to dim. Until one day, she realized the only person who had ever truly doubted her was the one she had trusted the most. That day, she decided to rise without explanation. She launched her business, and her joy returned, not because the friend left, but because she stopped asking for approval in places that never held her fully. Sagittarius, your path is not meant to be validated by everyone. In fact, it won't be, especially not by those still hiding from their own light. The pretender is not your enemy, but they are not your guide either. They are the test, the mirror, the opportunity to ask yourself, am I willing to dull my fire just to keep someone from feeling too cold? Or am I ready to protect my radiance, even if it means walking into new spaces where I am not yet known, but where I am finally safe? You deserve to be surrounded by people who clap when you rise, not just when you fall. People who don't just mourn with you but rejoice with you. People who aren't threatened by your freedom but inspired by it. And until those souls arrive, let it be enough to walk with yourself. Because the one who truly knows their worth never needs to beg for support. They simply become their own flame, and from that flame, others who burn bright will find them. Hold this truth close, Sagittarius. Not everyone who stands beside you walks with you, and not everyone who smiles deserves your trust. But you, your fire, your joy, your path deserves to be honored. Without apology, without shrinking, without delay. Gate 2. The Leech, the one who drains but never refills. Sagittarius, there's a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot fix. A weight that settles deep in the soul when you've poured so much of yourself into someone, only to realize they were never trying to carry anything of their own. You call it love. You call it care. But over time it becomes something else entirely. An invisible erosion of your energy, your spirit, your sense of joy. You give. You show up. You answer late-night messages. You say yes even when your heart says no. Because you believe that to love someone is to hold space for them. And that's beautiful. But only if the space you hold is also held for you. The Leech is not always loud. They don't demand, they don't scream. They don't need to. They appear in the form of constant need. Never violent, never cruel, just quietly and endlessly empty. They come to you with stories of pain, patterns of misfortune, another crisis they cannot face alone. And because you, Sagittarius, are born with a brave and boundless heart, you respond. Again, and again, and again. You open your arms. You open your wallet. You open your heart, your schedule, your life. Until one day you look around and realize everything is open except them. You see, the Leech doesn't build. They absorb. They don't seek solutions, they seek providers. They don't grow through your love. They rest in it like a hammock, swinging while you carry the weight of both souls. And what makes it harder is that they rarely look like bad people. Some of them truly are wounded. Some have never learned how to stand on their own. Some have been abandoned and cling to you like you're their last breath. And because you see their sadness, you confuse it with sincerity. But sadness alone is not a reason to sacrifice yourself. Pain does not equal permission. Sagittarius, your energy is sacred. It is wild and luminous. And yet too often you hand it away piece by piece, hoping that if you give enough of yourself, someone will finally stay. But the Leech doesn't stay out of love. They stay out of survival. And when your fire burns low, when you finally say, I need a break, they don't ask if you're okay. They ask why you've changed, why you're distant, why you're suddenly not there every time they reach out. They don't miss you, they miss the access. There was a Sagittarius man who once told me, I've always been the strong one, the dependable one. My family relied on me for everything: money, comfort, decisions. I gave until I had nothing left. And when I finally collapsed, no one even noticed. They just said I was being dramatic. His voice broke when he said it, not out of anger but exhaustion. Because that's what the leech does. They keep taking until you forget what it feels like to be full. And the worst part? You start to believe it's your fault. You tell yourself you should have been stronger, more patient, less selfish. But Sagittarius, choosing to protect your own energy is not selfishness. It is sacred responsibility. You were not born to be a container for endless sorrow. You were born to live, to create, to expand. And anyone who cannot celebrate that expansion, who only clings tighter every time you grow, is not loving you. They are using you as a lifeline they never planned to release. The Buddha once said, "No one can walk the path for another." And yet, how many paths have you walked holding someone else's shoes? How many dreams have you put on hold while someone else searched for themselves? How many nights have you stayed up, worrying if they were okay while no one asked if you were breathing? Your heart was not made to be an emergency room for people who refuse to heal. Yes, you can love them, but love does not mean endless access. Love does not mean draining your soul until there's nothing left for you. You are not a lighthouse that must stay lit for ships that never intend to dock, only pass by when the sea gets rough. And if you've ever been called selfish for setting a boundary, remember this. Only those who benefited from your lack of boundaries will say that. The leech will never praise you for growing. They will say you've changed. And you have, because exhaustion taught you that survival is not love, and self-abandonment is not kindness. You are finally realizing that your light must first warm your own heart before it can safely shine for others. Sagittarius, your generosity is beautiful. But even beauty needs to be protected. You were not meant to be a constant giver in a world that only knows how to receive. You were meant to exchange energy with souls who fill you back, not drain you dry. And if that means walking away from certain people, so be it. Let them go. Let the guilt go. Let the cycle go. Because you can only carry someone for so long before you forget how to stand on your own. You do not have to earn love through sacrifice. You do not have to keep bleeding to prove that you care. And you do not have to explain your exhaustion to anyone who only sees you as a resource, not a soul. It's time to rest, to reclaim the fire you've given away, to choose relationships that nourish, not deplete, and to remind yourself that real love never feels like burden, feels like breath. Gate 3. The manipulator, the one who rewires your truth. Sagittarius, there's a kind of darkness that doesn't arrive with storms or thunder. It arrives quietly, cloaked in concern, draped in gentle words and familiar smiles. It sits beside you not to warn but to twist. It does not forbid your joy, it asks if you're sure. It does not silence your dreams, it simply questions their timing. And slowly, without realizing, you begin to doubt yourself, not because of what they say, but because of how they make you feel when you do what once made your soul sing. The manipulator doesn't yell. They don't need to. Their power lies in subtle erosion, pressing just enough so that you bend, shifting just enough so that your center no longer feels familiar. They might be your partner, your friend, a family member, someone who once held you when you cried, who laughed with you when life was light. But when your voice grows stronger, when your dreams begin to ask for space, when your truth no longer fits the mold they crafted around you, their warmth becomes a cool distance. Their presence, once grounding, now wraps around you like a soft rope, firm but unseen. Sagittarius, you are a seeker of truth. You are not meant to live behind glass, monitored, adjusted, filtered. You were born to roam, to explore, to speak your fire without apology. But somewhere along the way, someone mistook your fire for danger. Or maybe you allowed them to convince you that your brightness made others uncomfortable. So you dimmed. You apologized too quickly. You explained too much. You made yourself smaller in rooms where you once lit the whole ceiling with laughter. You weren't being dramatic, you were being shaped. Not in love, but in control. The manipulator is rarely obvious. That's why it hurts so much. Because for a long time you thought what you had was safety. You thought their concern meant care. You thought their silence meant reflection. You thought their disapproval meant you had gone too far. But no, Sagittarius. What it really meant was this: your spirit was beginning to outgrow their control. There's a woman I once met, a Sagittarius who had spent 15 years married to a man everyone called kind, supportive, calm. He never raised his voice, she told me, but I always had to lower mine. When she laughed too loudly, he would smile with polite discomfort. When she dreamed too big, he would call it impractical. And when she wanted to travel, to create, to expand, he would remind her of how chaotic the world is. "I'm just protecting you," he'd say. And for years she believed him. Until one day, she looked at a picture of herself from before the marriage and didn't recognize the eyes. "I forgot I used to shine," she whispered. Sagittarius, that's what happens when manipulation wears the mask of care. It doesn't steal your voice. It teaches you to suppress it yourself. It doesn't lock you in. It hands you the key and convinces you the door is too dangerous to open. It speaks in, "I'm only trying to help." In, "You're being sensitive." In, "You're not the same anymore." And slowly you start to wonder if the version of you that is most free, most alive, most daring, is the version that deserves love at all. But let me say this clearly, it is. The truth is, those who try to reshape your truth are not afraid of your chaos. They are afraid of their own. They fear what they cannot predict. They fear the path you walk alone. And they especially fear the version of you who no longer seeks permission. Because once you stop asking if you're allowed to be yourself, they lose the quiet hold they've kept on your soul. Sagittarius, love is not supposed to confuse your intuition. It is not meant to be a maze of unspoken rules and silent tests. It is not meant to punish you for evolving, or shame you for shining. Love, when true, makes you more of yourself, not less. It does not require you to soften your edges, lower your flame, or whisper when your spirit is ready to roar. If you find yourself constantly second-guessing your words, if you edit your truth before it leaves your lips, if you feel a quiet fear when you want to share your joy, something is off. If you walk into a room and instinctively scan the mood before deciding how much of yourself you're allowed to bring, that's not harmony. That's self-erasure. You've been told you're impulsive. You've been told you're too much. You've been told your truth is inconvenient. But Sagittarius, what they call too much is exactly what this world needs. The world doesn't need you quieter. It needs you real. It needs your laugh, your questions, your refusal to stay in boxes that were built by fear. Because your soul did not come here to perform a role in someone else's controlled play. You came here to write your own script. And so let this be the moment you reclaim your truth. Let this be the moment you trust your own voice more than the shadows in someone else's silence. Let this be the moment you say, "I don't need to make myself smaller for you to stay. I don't need to explain my freedom. I don't need to apologize for evolving." You are not here to comfort those who fear the light. You are here to walk with those who can hold it. Who can hold you. Fully. Freely. Fiercely. You don't have to confront anyone. You don't have to prove anyone wrong. You only need to return to yourself. And when you do, you will notice something sacred. That the need to be accepted no longer governs your choices. That the spaces where your light once felt too big were simply the wrong rooms. That the people who truly love you will never ask you to shrink. They will sit beside you, hands open, and say, "Shine. I'll adjust my eyes." This is the kind of love your soul was made for. And if it hasn't found you yet, it's only because you're still unlearning the love that required your silence. You are not here to be molded. You are here to remember what it feels like to be whole. Gate 4. The dream killer, the one who makes you doubt the fire. Sagittarius, your dreams have always been your compass. They are not just ideas or plans. They are soul memories of who you came here to become. You don't dream like others. You dream in symbols, in visions, in movement. You feel your future in your bones, even before it arrives. And because of that, your dreams are sacred. But they are also vulnerable, especially to those who cannot see what you see, and whose own dreams died long ago without ever being grieved. The dream killer is rarely cruel. They come with soft words, laced with realism. They wear the face of caution, of experience, of just being practical. When you dare to share something wild, something tender, something that lights up your entire spirit, they smile and tilt their head gently. "That's beautiful," they say. "But are you sure?" And in that moment something shifts. Not because their doubt is truth, but because their fear plants itself in your vision and slowly begins to grow. They don't say you can't. They say it's unlikely. They don't say don't try. They say maybe wait a little longer. They don't tell you your dream is foolish. They say the world is harsh, and they don't want to see you hurt. And so, without meaning to, you begin to rewrite the dream. Make it smaller, more realistic, less bright, less you. Until one day you find yourself living a version of life that fits someone else's fear, not your own faith. Sagittarius, you are not here to fit. You are here to expand. And your dreams, those bold, beautiful longings that wake you up at night, are not mistakes. They are messages. They are maps. They are sacred invitations to live a life that reflects the fullness of your soul. But when you begin to believe that your dreams are too much, when you start hiding them out of politeness or reshaping them so others won't flinch, you lose more than your direction, you lose your fire. There was once a Sagittarius woman who had always dreamed of starting her own healing center. For years, she told herself it was just a fantasy, that people like her, empaths, visionaries, soft-hearted rebels, don't get to build things that last. Her partner, well-meaning but tethered to fear, would nod and say, "That sounds lovely, babe. But who's going to pay for it?" And so she kept it tucked away like a childhood diary, opening it only when she was alone, reading the same lines over and over. Maybe one day, maybe someday, until someday became never, and the light in her eyes began to fade, not because she stopped believing, but because she started listening to voices that weren't hers. Sagittarius, when someone questions your dream, it is not always about you. Sometimes it is a mirror of their own lost courage, a projection of their own disappointment, a reflection of the chances they never took. But you are not responsible for their unhealed dreams. You are responsible for the one still burning quietly in you, the one that refuses to be silenced no matter how many times you've buried it under "not now, not possible, too late." Dream killers don't always do it out of malice. Some are people who love you deeply, but do not understand you. They fear for you. They fear what your boldness might cost. They fear that if you go too far, you'll lose them. And in truth, maybe you will. But Sagittarius, if someone only loves the version of you who plays small, then they never loved the whole you to begin with. They loved your silence. They loved your stillness. But your soul was made for movement. You were never meant to stay still just to make someone else feel safe. There is a kind of betrayal that doesn't come from cruelty but from hesitation. The friend who doesn't cheer when you leap. The partner who supports you until you begin to outgrow them. The parent who says, "We just want you to be safe," while slowly teaching you that safety requires self-abandonment. And the voice that says, "Be realistic," while forgetting that Sagittarius was never born for realism. You were born for truth. Your ruling planet, Jupiter, does not whisper. It expands. It dreams loud. It asks for more. And so do you. And yes, your dreams will scare some people. Yes, your fire will overwhelm the ones still stuck in their ice. But let that be okay. You are not here to stay small. You are here to show what it looks like when a soul finally remembers who it is. You do not owe anyone your dimming. You do not need to prove your dream is viable before you dare to speak it aloud. And you do not need to wait for conditions to be perfect before you begin. If the dream is real, then the time is now. Because what you're carrying is not just a vision. It's a vow your soul made long before this life. A promise to keep becoming, even when others cannot see why. So the next time someone raises an eyebrow, or calls you idealistic, or says, "That's not how the world works," smile gently. And remember, the world they speak of is not the one you're building. The life they fear is not the one you're meant to lead. You are not planting seeds for their garden. You are planting stars for your own sky. You have every right to dream. Loudly, boldly, fearlessly, even when the world tries to silence you. Even when the dream killer sits beside you, cloaked in love, and asks if you're sure. You are. You've always been. Because deep down, the dream didn't come from nowhere. It came from Source. And Source does not whisper things it doesn't mean to manifest. So rise, Sagittarius. Speak your vision again. Louder this time. Not for their approval but for your freedom. Because when you dream without apology, you give others permission to remember their own fire too. Conclusion: you were never too much, you were always becoming. Sagittarius, if you've stayed with me through each gate of this journey, then somewhere deep inside your soul has been whispering, "Yes, this is what I've been carrying. This is what I've been afraid to name." And now that you've named it, not aloud perhaps but inside your sacred truth, something has already begun to change. Not suddenly, not explosively, but slowly, like a sunrise inching over the horizon of your own becoming. You were never too bright for this world. The world simply forgot how to keep its eyes open to real light. You were never too wild, too bold, too much. You were simply born remembering a life before restriction. A life where dreams weren't dissected, where your fire wasn't questioned, where love didn't ask you to shrink in order to survive. And every time you chose to stay silent, to dim your spark, to walk beside those who didn't understand you, your soul wasn't giving up. It was gathering the wisdom to one day return. That day is now. Because now you see them, the ones who pretended to love you but only clung to your light for their own shelter. The ones who applauded your vulnerability only to use it later as currency. The ones who disguised their control as care, their fear as guidance, their doubt as love. And yet, even now, Sagittarius, you are not bitter. Because bitterness is not your nature. You were made of warmth. Even the pain could not harden you. Even the betrayal could not close you entirely. And that's what makes you powerful. The power of Sagittarius is not just in your laughter or your courage. It's in your return. Your ability to remember who you are, even after being shaped, silenced, and forgotten. Your ability to choose truth again. To choose expansion, even when contraction feels safer. To choose love not as sacrifice, but as sacred alignment. So if today your chest feels lighter, if your breath feels a little deeper, if something within you is finally exhaling after years of holding everything in, that is no accident. That is your soul saying, thank you. You didn't forget me after all. You didn't lose yourself forever. You only wandered far enough to know how deeply you needed to come home. And from this place, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to seek closure from those who didn't know how to hold you. You don't need to wait for apologies that may never come, because your healing is not dependent on their regret. It is blooming right now in your truth, in your boundaries, in the softness you're finally allowing for yourself. Let others misunderstand your rising. Let them say you've changed. You have, because healing changes everything. It doesn't erase the wound, transforms it into wisdom, into compassion, into strength. So I invite you, dear Sagittarius, if this message has found its way into the quiet corners of your heart, to gently support its path forward. Share it with someone who also needs to remember their light. Like it. Subscribe if you feel called. Not because numbers matter, but because community does. Because there are other souls like you, standing at the edge of their own return, waiting for a sign that they're not alone. And here you are, still radiant, still brave, still becoming.